Hi, my name is Cheryl Rice, and today is June 15th, 2016. We're here at the offices of Scott & Kane in Knoxville, and it is my privilege and pleasure to interview Tom Scott as part of the Knoxville Bar Association's Legal History Project. Why don't you go ahead and state your full name?
Tom Scott, Thomas Stratton Scott, Jr.
Okay, and you are now with the firm of Scott & Kane?
Yes.
And how long have you been with this?
Since, with Chris Kane as in the name of the firm, since 2012, since October of 2012, when my former partner, Gordon Ball, moved his law office to his home.
Okay. And your offices are where?
In the Bank of America building in Knoxville on Main Street.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about your background, Tom, where you were born and
Okay, I was born in Covington, Virginia, Allegheny County, which is in the northwest part of Virginia, in the Virginia Highlands. That town is a paper mill town. West Virginia Pulp and Paper Mill came there in the early 1900s, built a paper mill. And my father, by the way, worked there for 50 years, starting at age 15, retired at age 65. Covington is county seat of Allegheny County, Virginia, which is very mountainous. It's a beautiful area. The mountains seem to just reach out and touch you almost. And I grew up there. I went through elementary school there and then on into Covington High School. We only had 11 grades when I went through school there. So we skipped what most people would have as the 8th grade and went from the 7th grade into a junior high school. For what was the 8th grade then was really what you would normally have as a freshman in high school. And that and puberty sort of diminished my scholastic achievements in high school. But I graduated from Covington High School and then went to Maryville College, graduated from there in 4 years. Then I went in the Army, almost 4 years, and came back to Knoxville, went to law school here at the University UT College of Law, and then started practicing, and I've been practicing now for a little over 48 years.
How did you come to Maryville for college?
Well, the short version is that my mother and father were very active in the Presbyterian Church. My mother was on the Virginia Synod Board, dealing with the real estate owned by the Virginia Presbytery. They wanted me to go to a small Presbyterian school. And so we had visited 2 or 3 other campuses by the time we got to Maryville College. And I wanted to go home. I didn't want to go on to Presbyterian in South Carolina and prolong this trip with my parents, because at that point in my life I didn't think they knew very much. Of course, I later reversed that opinion. But I said, well, I'll just go here when we got to Maryville. So that's how I ended up going to Maryville College.
What did you study in college, Tom?
I was a business administration major and a phys ed minor. Phys ed was a way to, I was a wrestler on the wrestling team in college, and so I knew the coach who taught some of these CRIP courses, and I needed the grade points so to balance out some of the other things that I did not do very well in. So I took phys ed as a minor. Made all A's and B's in phys ed. You know, the test would be, here's a catalog, outfit a gym, and you'd write down what you wanted in the gym and get an A.
Okay. When did you graduate from Maryville College?
I graduated in June of 1961.
Okay. And I understand that you went on to the military.
I did.
How did that come about?
Well, I had applied for a job with an insurance company, Provident. I believe it's located in Chattanooga. And also at the Alcoa plant, I turned in an application. Neither of those jobs came through. and I was going for an interview at a Sherwin-Williams paint store in Roanoke, Virginia, 60 miles from my hometown. And I was in my first car, a 1956 Ford Custom Line Coupe, and I was about halfway over to Roanoke to interview for this paint job, paint store position, hoping, to move up the ladder. But then I decided I just didn't feel good about going to work in a paint store. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but I turned my car around and went to the Army recruiter and joined the Army. Went home and told my mom and dad. They were not very happy about that, but anyway, so I joined the Army, and I was accepted into the Army Intelligence Corps, and I worked as a plainclothes investigator for the Army, doing primarily security clearance interviews with character witnesses and developed witnesses, or we call them developed character witnesses. So if you gave me the name of John Jones, I would ask John Jones, who else would know this person? I'd go talk to them and find out about their loyalty and so forth. So I did that for almost 4 years, and then went to law school.
What made you decide to go to law school?
Probably because I wanted to be either, at one point I wanted to be a doctor or a lawyer, and I can remember listening to Perry Mason on the radio and sort of being enthralled with that sort of thing. And I knew that I couldn't pass chemistry and stuff like that. It was just not my aptitude. I had a very strong aptitude in the liberal arts, I think, and I did well in those kind of courses. So I was sort of suited for the study of law, and that's why.
Did you know any lawyers growing up?
Didn't know one. I knew of some lawyers. That's the funny thing about living in a small town. I can remember just as a child, my parents speaking favorably about a couple of lawyers. One was Hale Collins, whose son still practices there in Covington, and he was the most prominent criminal defense attorney of that early era in the 40s and 50s, and a colorful person. And my parents also knew a couple of other lawyers and always spoke highly of them. But I didn't know any lawyers. I knew Perry Mason.
And so, University of Tennessee College of Law, how did that?
Well, I went to Maryville College, and I fell in love with East Tennessee. I grew up in a mountain town, grew up hunting and fishing. And my father belonged to a wonderful hunt club that I now belong to, as does my brother. And, I just wanted to stay here if I could. So I went back, I went to UT Law School.
How did you find law school?
Easy, interesting, I loved it. I poured over it. I was a pretty well dedicated student. I treated it like a job. I think the Army let me grow up, quite frankly. I probably would have flunked out if I'd have gone right out of college. But I did very well in law school and was on the law review and graduated Order of the Coif. So law school and I jived, I guess you could say.
Did you, your career has been in litigation. Was that your intent or your desire
Yes.
while you were in law school?
Well, I wanted to be a famous criminal defense attorney, but that didn't work out. I became a defense lawyer defending lawsuits or plaintiff cases, working with the insurance industry and with a lot of major corporations until I made the switch in 2001.
When did you become licensed in Tennessee?
Probably February or March of 1968.
And your first job out of law school was with the Arnett?
Yes, Arnett, Draper, and Haygood. It was at that time a three-person law firm. Foster Arnett, Jack Draper, and Lewis Haygood. Foster's now deceased. Jack and Lewis remain good friends, as do a lot of the other lawyers still in that firm.
So you became the fourth person?
I was the fourth lawyer in the firm, and had a great time, worked there 32 years. Hardest thing I ever had to do was to tell my partner Lewis Haygood, for purposes of giving a notice under our partnership agreement, the hardest thing I ever had to do really was to tell him that I was leaving that law firm. You know, it was part of my life, and I guess I was part of their life too, you know. It was hard to do, but I needed to do it for myself, and of course, looking back, I'm glad I did. Not because of them, but because of me, you know. So now I've got a two-person law firm.
Tell us a little bit about your early days practicing law at Arnett Draper, and what that experience was like in the legal market here in Knoxville.
Well, it was, of course, smaller. I was trying to remember how many lawyers there were when I started. I'm sure it was not over 500, I don't think. Probably closer to 300. I'm not real sure about that. But it was a small bar, and everybody was concentrated downtown. At least the vast majority of lawyers practiced right downtown. And the courthouse was the center. And, you know, the firm I joined was a litigation law firm. We did a little bit, or they did a little bit of transactional work. I never did. And I never did wills or trust or anything like that. I used to do some divorce work, and anything I could bring in on my own, I got half of the fee in those early days. So I would take almost anything that paid a little bit. But it was, the bar was pretty close. You knew everybody. They wouldn't know me as a brand new lawyer, but I would know of the other lawyers, and they were characters. More so, I think, than today. I can remember the humor that existed back then among lawyers was the insulting kind. You know, it would see who could insult the other lawyer more in public and embarrass them, you know. So there were was a lot of that went on. Oh, yeah, you know, it was a fun place. Law was different back then. You know, the files would be 2 or 3 inches. Now they're banker boxes. Every case I've got's got probably at least 8 or 10 banker boxes of documents. Of course, now it's all on electronically stored as well, but I like paper. So it was different, less technical, more personal probably.
More personal in what sense?
Well, in my own present law practice, because I do so much medical litigation, representing plaintiffs in med mal cases, we have a very close group of lawyers that do that work here. There may be 5 law firms that do all of the defense work. So I see the same defense lawyers all the time. There's probably 25 or 30 people that I run into constantly in my cases. And generally do not run into other plaintiff lawyers unless I'm associated with some other plaintiff's lawyer. So for me, it's still sort of a closed little bar, a specialty group, I guess. But generally, I think that you see lawyers less frequently, and so you don't form the bonds that you did maybe before. It's harder to be friends with somebody you've only met once, may not ever have a case against again, you know. So that way it's different.
Tell me a little bit about your things that you were involved in within the bar, because you've been very involved.
I have. If I could give any young lawyers advice, would be to say yes to opportunities. And I have tried to do that, and so as a result, I've been involved pretty heavily with the Knoxville Bar Association. I was president of that, and I've been president of the Legal Aid Society, now the Legal Aid Society of East Tennessee. I was the state chairman of the American College of Trial Lawyers for the state of Tennessee. I've been, I can't even remember everything really. Been state chairman of a couple of other specialty organizations. I was state president of the American Board of Trial Advocates. And locally, I guess it was primarily the Knoxville Bar Association and Legal Aid Society.
And you say that was something you'd advise young people to do. Why is that? What does that
Well, I
mean
think
to you?
it first of all, it's beneficial to your own growth, and it's beneficial to those you interact with. I think it helps you become known. If you're interested in being well regarded, it's a good way to do it. And you make a contribution, pay back a little bit. I've always admired people that did that. So I've tried to say yes when I could, and it has served me well. Leading on into even being a law professor as an adjunct. So.
And I think early in your career, you were asked to do something that led to that adjunct professorship.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Well, I can't remember exactly when it was, what year, but I was at home one evening about 6 o'clock, and this senior law student called me, John Harbour, who's now practicing here in Knoxville, and John called. He was a senior in law school, and he was putting on a big mock trial the next day with a prominent plaintiff's lawyer from West Tennessee, whose name was Julian Gwynn. Julian was colorful. He wore flashy clothes with a handkerchief spilling out of his pocket and pink glasses, and was pretty well known. And so John called me and said that he was in a panic that the defense attorney who was going to do the defense work in this mock trial at the law school had backed out on him at the last minute, and he was desperate. Could I help? And of course, my first reaction was to say, "Are you kidding? It's 6 o'clock and you want me to get ready for something like this tomorrow?" But then I said yes, and he brought the file over, and I worked till about 1 o'clock in the morning getting ready, and went over and did that mock trial, and it turned out rather well, I think. Everybody liked it. And as a result of that, a little while later, the dean of the law school called me and asked me if I'd like to teach trial practice. So I did that, and then that led to a 5-day, very intense seminar that Bob Pryor and I and 2 or 3 of the law professors put on for several years, maybe 6 or 8 years, I can't remember for sure, back in the 70s and 80s. And of course that gave me some exposure and was enjoyable. And I think that led into being active and, moving up the food chain in some of these organizations.
Who was the dean of the law school at that time?
Dean Penniger, Ken Penniger was the dean at that time.
You were also chairman of the State Board of Professional
I
Responsibility.
was, yeah.
Tell us about that experience.
Well, I think it started in 2005, and it's probably the thing I'm most proud of as far as, recognition or having accomplished something worthwhile. But Riley Anderson, the former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Tennessee, called me one day and asked me if I would consider serving on the Board of Professional Responsibility, or BPR as we call it, which, as you know, governs the lawyer's conduct in the state and enforces the rules of ethics. So I jumped at that and was on the board. Then I became the chairman of the BPR, and then served 2 terms, 6 years on it. And I think that was it was just a great experience. And it really brought home to me how varied problems in the ethical world can be. That, most of us go through our legal career without problems, ethical issues arising if you do things right, work hard, try to do good work and all, be honest and upright, so forth. But there are a lot of people that fall below the glory of God in the legal world. And so that was a very rewarding experience. Got to work with several of the justices who, we have a liaison justice on the VPR. So that was fun. Enjoyed that.
How did that impact your law practice, if at all?
Well, it took a lot of time at the time, but since I'm my own boss, I can take what time I need to take and do what I want to do pretty much when I want to do it within the schedule. So monetarily, it didn't affect me at all, really. Let's say it took some time, but it also led to me doing some work defending lawyers in ethical matters with the board. It's helped me interact with members of the board now, the lawyers, not the members of the board, but the disciplinary lawyers. When I have a client that's run afoul of the BPR, and I've done some testifying in that field. So of course you learn a good deal in 6 years serving on the board.
We talked a little bit about your time at Arnett, Draper and Haygood, which you said was, I guess, litigation and primarily defense of lawsuits. Are there any particular matters you handled while at Arnett, Draper that you're particularly proud of?
Yeah, some come to mind for various reasons. Maybe because either they were complex or noteworthy at the time, or were large cases. But for example, I represented Procter & Gamble back in the days of the toxic shock syndrome rely cases that were going on. I had 2 or 3 of those cases here in Knoxville, and worked on those for 4, 5, 6 years, I guess. And I represented Procter & Gamble up until probably when I left my old law firm in 2001. And I also did a lot of marine litigation, represented many companies involved with boating. For example, Alvord Marine Corporation or Mercury Marine, Sea Ray Boats, and subsequently all of the Brunswick boating entities, both product liability and other types of some business litigation, employment litigation. But that kind of work did not follow me much after I left in 2001. I think you become perceived as either a plaintiff's lawyer or a defense lawyer. And while I kept a lot of those clients for a while, that kind of work diminished as the plaintiff's work grew. I still do business litigation as well as the plaintiff's cases.
What was your experience like being president of the Knoxville Bar?
A lot of fun. It was frightening at first because when I became president, I think in maybe 1995, and within 2 months, the executive director, longtime executive director, Marguerite McCampbell, decided she would retire, and she was the only employee of the KBA and knew everything about it. I knew very little about the actual inner workings in terms of trying to be the president of it and run the organization like a CEO might. And of course, it was smaller then, but we interviewed several people, including Marcia Wilson, and I hired her, and she came on board shortly after Marguerite had retired. And of course, she's still there. I spent last Saturday night up at Elkmont on a KBA excursion, seeing the fireflies and having a nice, enjoyable time. So that was probably my prime achievement as president of the bar. But otherwise you get to make speeches and host dinners, and I like to do that. I thought it was fun. I can remember a funny story. There was a prominent writer, and she was going to come and speak to one of our banquets. So I met her at the door, and I said, "Would you like some water or something?" She said, "I'd really like a martini." So she had her martini before her speech. It worked out well, loosened things up. I probably had 1 or 2 also.
Tell me about your transition from Arnett Draper to going out on your own?
Kinda, yeah. Well, it was brought about primarily because of my wanting to just change the focus of my work for the last 10 or 15 or 20 years, however long I might have to practice. So in 2001, I decided to start my own law firm as an association with Gordon Ball, who did a lot of class action work. And he and I had become friends through me defending one of his cases for Chevron Corporation. And anyway, so I decided to do that, and it was literally the hardest thing I ever did in my life, was to pick up the phone and call my partner, Louis Haygood, and tell him I needed to talk to him in person, and then broke that subject to him. And of course, it was hard for me as well as them to do that, but I think it's worked out. They've done fine, and so have I. But it was hard, and at that point in time, I was doing a major case involving the estate of a very prominent lady who died at age 98, and she left. She owned 49% of a major local corporation, and I represented Children's Hospital as a claimant, as a residuary beneficiary of her estate. And that case was heavy at the time, going on quite vigorously. And so I took that case with me, and that made my transition, of course, a lot easier. And that case lasted 2 or 3 more years. And of course, by then I was getting a lot more plaintiff's cases. Rocking and rolling.
Tell us about your involvement with the Legal Aid Society and how that's changed over the years in Knoxville.
Well, I have, I'm still contribute to the Legal Aid Society. But again, that was a service organization. They really do a great work. And I had always felt a little bit guilty that I don't do a lot of pro bono work. I really don't do any intentionally. Now, some of my cases turn out poorly, and I end up doing pro bono work instead of making any money on them. But, the Legal Aid Society was a great board to be on. A lot of really dedicated people that I otherwise would never have been able to meet. And so I was on that board for several years and served as president. And that was shortly before they merged. The Knoxville Legal Aid Society then merged with the East Tennessee up in Johnson City and Oak Ridge to form the Legal Aid Society of East Tennessee.
How was the organization different when it was Knoxville centered?
I guess I can't really answer that except to say that, you had less to worry about, but the transition was just starting, and I think I probably went off the board maybe the year before it became Legal Aid Society of East Tennessee. I'm sure there were competing interests for funding and that sort of thing that I'm sure has worked out in the long run, but I know that was a big concern. So
you talked about kind of your decision to go to law school. What do you think has been one of the major influences on your legal career in terms of your life experiences? Well,
mentoring. I had good mentors. I went to work right out of law school with 3 really good lawyers, and who were also very high-minded people and very ethical. They were good trainers, and they tolerated my cocky attitude. I was telling you one day about being called up on the carpet by one of my partners, Jack Draper, who said he'd been sent as an emissary to speak to me, that they didn't care for the way I would go to Mr. Arnett and ask him his opinion about something, and if I didn't like what he said, I'd then go to Louis and ask Louis Haygood If I didn't like what he said, I'd go to Jack, and if I didn't care about his opinion, I'd do what I wanted to anyway. So I promised I wouldn't do that again. Probably did do it again, though, but we had a great time. I mean, they were really good to work with, and that firm was growing. I don't think that the mindset of that law firm at that time, and while I was there, was not to become real big, but to be always very effective lawyers, and that's a wonderful law firm. They're my frenemies, friendly enemies, or frenemies, as I call it. Today, I have cases against Rick Powers and Mike Fitzpatrick, who do medical malpractice defense work for the hospital here, the Covenant hospitals. We run into each other a lot in our cases.
My sources tell me that one of the secrets to your success, perhaps, is that you're very diligent in your preparation. Do you
I try to
agree with
be.
that?
Yeah, you have to work hard. It's like one of the sayings in the American College of Trial Lawyers is that a trial lawyer is like a hermit and a mule. You pull a heavy load and you lock yourself away and prepare for the cases, you know. And that's probably true. And it's these notebooks on the table are evidence of the kind of preparation work that we try to do. And I think most good lawyers do that. I mean, you know, that's something the public doesn't see. They don't see you working at home at night or on the weekends and, you know, preparing for cases. And of course, I think as the older you get, I've had to change my approach. You know, as I've gotten a little older, I'm not as strong as I used to be, and that sort of thing. So I probably use more notes, but I'm probably more effective than I ever was, or at least as effective maybe. I think people like older lawyers. We have to adjust ourselves, though, as older lawyers to the millenniums, and it's a different ballgame with young people. I guess I'm sounding really old. I shouldn't say all that, but it's true, you know. And you have to, as a trial lawyer, you've got to play to people of every generation.
How do you achieve that? That sounds challenging.
It's hard, you know. It really is. I guess I think that lawyers need to be shorter, take shorter depositions for proof, for example. Try to stay within a 15 or 20 minute time span, otherwise you're going to lose your audience. We think that everything we ask and every answer we get is important, but it's really not. So I think I need to take that advice myself, because I tend to be over laborious sometimes in doing depositions and that sort of thing. Of course, now we can do designations and cut out a lot of the trash from the depositions. So that helps.
As you know, I am in law practice with Lewis Foster, who came to Arnett Draper a few years after you joined the firm, and he shared. He actually came about 8 or 9 or 10 months after I did. So we were new associates together. Pretty much. I was a little ahead of him, but not much. We were great friends. Still are. Well, he thinks a lot of you. He shared with me the fact that one of the partners there referred to you on occasion as CJS Scott, and lawyers will know what CJS stands
Corpus
for.
Juris Secundum, which of course is a huge set of encyclopedias of the law. And Foster Arnett used to accuse me of knowing it all, or being a know-it-all, I guess. And so he called me that sometimes. He printed up a sweatshirt, which I still have, and it had CJS Scott across it. It had a lot of other things too that we don't need to go into, but yeah, he coined that, and he told me that I was frequently wrong but never in doubt. And there's probably some truth to that.
One of the things that you had shared with me was the impact that your military service had on your law school experience and your career. Not just the fact that it helped you grow up, but how else did it impact your career?
Well, it did help me grow up. I mean, I thought the military was a great experience. I truly enjoyed it. The basic training was rigorous at first. I took it in the summertime at Fort Jackson, South Carolina in Columbia. And so it was hot as 40 blazes and very muggy. I still enjoyed that, though. I liked the structure of it and so forth. But I became an investigator, and I might be interviewing the president of William & Mary, which I have done as a 21 or 22-year-old. And then the next day I might be interviewing a shipyard worker or a school teacher or, the president of a bank or a janitor. I mean, you interacted with people from all walks of life. And I was, I had an official position with a set of credentials, sort of like an FBI agent would, and you throw those credentials on somebody and got their attention, because in the Army, if you don't have a security clearance, you don't go very far. And so the security clearance, top secret or whatever it is primarily what I did was investigate people who were seeking to have a security clearance. And so that allowed me to gain a lot of self-confidence, the ability to ask questions, to interview people, interrogate people, and the training was fun. I went through Fort Holabird, Army Intelligence, so we learned how to pick locks, how to do surveillance, how to do secret writing and do drops and leave messages. It was a lot of fun. I mean, and we learned how to type. They set you down in front of a typewriter, which I had never done, and you had the key. First typewriters, you did have the numbers and letters. And our teacher was a lady named Miss Clicka, and she had a yardstick, or a ruler, rather. And she'd come home and she'd slap your hand if she saw you looking down, or maybe slap you in the head with it. And then after you did that for a week or two, they took the numbers and the letters off the keyboards. Now you had blanks, and you had to type just by feel. And so it's amazing. I was able to learn how to type like that, and can still do it without looking at the keyboard pretty much. Now, if I thought about it, I couldn't do it. But if you just do it automatically, it works. It's odd. So I had a very good experience in the Army. And when I got to law school, I felt like I had really grown up a lot and was ready to really do something hard, which I thought it would be hard. Turned out it wasn't really that hard. I loved it so much that I just really studied hard, and I enjoyed the process. It's some funny stories. I'll bore you with one. We had a law professor who's now deceased named E.O. Overton. Dr. Overton taught conflicts of law and several other equity or chancery practice, and was rumored to be one of the more difficult law professors and a hard person to make a good grade out of. So he happened to be the person that I sat down in front of the first day of law school, where he went over your record and gave you some orientation. And when I sat down, he looked at my college grades, which were not enough to get in law school today. And he said, "Well, Scott, you've been in the Army. You really need to go back in the Army. They'll keep you. You'll never make it through law school. First of all, you went to a private college and they just kept you going through there and let you graduate because they needed the money. Secondly, you read too slowly, and you have to do a lot of reading as a lawyer, and you're too slow. And I just don't think you're going to make it. So you ought to give somebody else a chance and go back in the Army." And I don't know if he was doing that to make me leave, or whether it was his way of trying to, put a burr under your saddle, or what, but it pissed me off, quite frankly, to use a vulgarism. Well, 2.5 calendar years later, when I graduated from law school and was getting ready to take the bar, his office was right beside the moot courtroom. So I went up to him and I said, "Dr. Overton, I just want to remind you of something and have you admit to me that you were wrong about me." And so I recounted this story. And I said, you were wrong. Look, I made it through law school. I did really well. I was on the law review. I made order of the court. And I took you 4 times and had 3 A's and a B. He said, oh, you weren't wrong. I wasn't wrong. You're just the exception to the general rule, which, of course, as you know, we learned the general rule, the minority rule, and the Tennessee rule if it's different. Well, I was the different rule. But that's why you could never get anything up on Overton. He'd get up on the desk and dance, or jump off the desk like an acrobat, or get under the desk. I mean, he was really quite a character.
How many students were in your law school class?
I think 33.
Did you have any women in your law school
Yeah,
class?
we had a couple. We had a former Miss Tennessee in our law. I can't remember her name right now, but yeah, she was she was either in my class or maybe a class behind me, but she was in law school at the time. Very few women back then, and when I started practicing law, I think there were only 3 women in the Knoxville Bar Association. One of them was a lady named Irma Greenwood, who was very prominent. She was with what is now the Kramer Rayson Law Firm, and there were 2 others, and I cannot remember their names. It's been too long ago. But that has been quite a change. Now more than half of the law students, I assume, are women, and it's not anything unusual to, have 3 or 4 women are sitting around the conference room table in depositions. That's been a good thing.
What do you think has been the biggest change in the practice of law since you started to today?
The 2 things. One, the use of discovery, the technical aspects of equipment. We now have a trial pad program on an iPad, which, is about 6 inches by 4 inches and thin, a little iPad, and it's got a program on it that holds thousands of pages. And it's so intuitive that you can push a button and pop up things on the screen and blow them up. That kind of graphics, those kind of graphics are expected by juries today, and are helpful both to the jury as well as lawyers. So that the technical ability to make presentations is incredibly different, and the overuse of discovery. And we give, for example, we'll collect all the medical records of a client and turn them over right away to the defense lawyers. Well, first thing we get is an order allowing them to go back behind us and get the very same thing, to make sure, I guess, that we've given them everything. Every file is 3 or 4 banker's boxes. I may have said this before. Now, it used to be, you'd have a file like that might have 2 or 3 depositions and very little written discovery and almost no pleadings. Back when I started, you'd file a complaint, or we called it a declaration at the time, and then there was a 1-sentence pleading called the general plea, as I recall, that's what it was called. And it basically just put at issue everything in the complaint. Of course, cases were settled more cheaply then, and the expense of litigation is incredible. It's horrendous, especially in my field. I guess technologically, with most businesses, as technology has improved, you change with it. I can well remember 2 things, I guess, that stick out in my mind. I think the most amazing invention for me was the fax machine. The idea that somebody could stick a piece of paper in a machine in New York City, and I'd pull it out in my machine here in Knoxville, Tennessee, instead of mailing it. Well, now it's even quicker with emails, PDF, and bang, it's there. And of course, that means that you are now married to your computer or your iPhone. You cannot get away from your work at all, hardly. And it's a compulsion. I think people are compelled to look at these devices, and I'm certainly one of them. You do so much work just on an iPhone. I can research the most difficult of medical issues, and find medical articles just in seconds. and pretty soon know as much about an issue as a doctor would on a narrow focus like that. And I can, the second thing I can remember is over at Arnett, Draper and Haygood when we got our first computers. And so they hired this person to come in and teach us how to hit the keys, not to bang the keys. I mean, you know, how to touch them or whatever. And so not just how to use a computer, but the most basic of how do you cut it on, how do you turn it on, and this, that, and the other. Incredible.
At that time, did you ever dream how that was going to impact the practice?
Well, you know, probably not at the time, but it quickly did. It's just like automobiles or so. You know, now one of my cars, the latest one I bought, if you go over the center line, the steering wheel vibrates. If you start to invade somebody's lane or train's lanes, then a car's beside you, you get a warning. If it senses that you may be sleepy, a sign pops up and a buzzer goes off and says sleepiness detected, and you've got to hit OK to make it quit. You know, it's incredible, the technological changes that we've had in the world and in the legal profession. And so, and I think, you know, people think there are too many lawyers. I think the legal business is glutted, and I don't know. And I'm told that clients that hire people by the hour are very, you know, prone to, especially insurance companies, you know, audit their files and try to chisel them down on their hours and stuff. I mean, fortunately, I don't have to put up with that nonsense, and that's one of the liberating features of being my own boss, having my own law firm, and you know, being a plaintiff's lawyer. You know, my staff talks to the clients, and they get every piece of paper and every deposition that's taken. I don't have to write long reports, and that sort of thing. I sometimes do, but seldom.
Speaking of hours and billing, what is your recollection of what the average hourly fee was for a lawyer when you started practicing?
When I started, probably maybe $35 an hour for senior lawyers, 40 maybe. Seems to me that Foster Arnett, who was one of the more prominent lawyers in Knoxville when I joined his firm, I think he was charging probably $35 an hour. And then Jack Draper and Lewis Haygood probably charged $25, and I probably charged $20 as an associate, or maybe even $15. That's hard for me to remember, but it wasn't high, it wasn't much. But by the same token, I can remember buying the biggest and the best Oldsmobile 98 that you could buy in 1976. And I think that car cost $7,300. And it was a fine automobile. Today, that same car, if they made Oldsmobiles, they're no longer made, but it'd be a $55,000 or $60,000 car probably. So, you know, you could buy a pair of shoes for $20 instead of $300.
That I have not asked you about that you wish I had asked and would like to tell us?
You did ask me as a preliminary when we were talking how I wanted to be remembered, and I said I didn't care. I guess that's really not true. And so I thought about that a little bit. I would hope I'd be remembered as somebody who was fair, honest, hardworking, did a good job, and was competent, and had a good sense of humor, and had a lot of friends, and interacted well with people. That's kind of how I hope I see myself. I don't know that I achieve it all the time, but that's how I like to see people. And even my adversaries in the medical malpractice field, once in a while tempers will flare. I remember one day I made a comment to one of the prominent defense lawyers that I thought what he had said was disingenuous, and he really took offense to it. And we had sort of a verbal exchange that was very unpleasant. And so he left in a huff. And he didn't practice far from this building. And so I wrote I immediately felt very bad about that, so I wrote him an apology. And my assistant, who was taking my apology over to his law firm, cross paths was his assistant who was bringing his. So we crossed apologies. But you know, we're friends. My adversaries carry my suitcase sometimes because I have a small problem that keeps me from carrying heavy loads or running or walking fast anymore. And so they've been known to carry my bags through the airports.
Seems to me that you're a bit of a relationship guy.
No, probably. You must be, I guess, as a lawyer. Sometimes it helps you get business.
Seems that you enjoy interacting with lawyers.
I do. Yeah, that's probably the best thing about being a lawyer is the interaction with lawyers. And, you know, tried to change the perception maybe. But it'll all pass. You know, after 48 years of it, there's a couple of more, 3 more years, who knows. Never know what tomorrow will bring. But, you know, the thing is, you remember people more than you remember cases. I've handled so many cases. I bet I've tried 300 jury trials and remember very few of them. I met a guy at this KBA event last Saturday, and he told me that he and I had tried a car wreck case in Jefferson County, or Jefferson City rather, some years back. I had absolutely no recollection of it whatsoever. I couldn't even remember him. So, you know, it's fleeting.
If there's anything that you have on your bucket list as far as a lawyer,
what I'd like to do?
What would that be? Yes.
You know, not a whole lot. I've been fortunate enough to do some traveling. I'd like to go back. I love Italy. And interestingly enough, I've never been to Maine or Vermont. I'm going to make a New England trip. But I've always wanted to go to Alaska. I've always had an interest in the far north and Alaska. I'd like to do that. I'm going to. I just haven't had the occasion. But not so much. You know, I don't really have anything that I want to do that I haven't done. Maybe I need to take more time off.
Do you have a professional bucket list?
Not really. Maybe I should.
Seems
Yeah.
you've done quite a bit. Maybe you
Well,
did it all.
you just take the next case. I have a little bit of an unusual, or maybe it's not unusual, but I've always looked at the cases as being what's important. And with the idea that if you analyze the case and are well prepared, you and the client will be taken care of. Now, you may not win. And in my field, it's hard to win med-mal cases because the good ones are settled. And the ones that are marginal or maybe have some loophole or some potential for a defense, those cases are tried, and the juries really do try to. I think you've got to really have a clear-cut case, if not an absolute case, to get a verdict. So you come away sometimes with a losing battle, but if your client is happy, even though you may not make money, you've lost money on the case. I've had a lot of clients be appreciative of the effort, win, lose, or draw. And you have an opportunity to change lives a little bit, which I think I have accomplished for some clients, for sure. You know, but as any professional bucket list, no, not really. Just get through the next deposition and the next case, go on to the next one.
Thank you for participation in this interview. And unless you have anything else you'd like to offer, I think we're concluded.
No, it's been a good ride. I guess when I was invited to give this interview, I'm thinking to myself, well, It's when you get old, they interview you. So I'm a senior member of the bar.
Thank you for your
Yeah, and
service.
people in your age bracket are young lawyers.
Thanks for your
The real
service.
young lawyers are baby lawyers. Yeah. So anyway, well, thanks for interviewing me.